Rain had been tapping my apartment window since sunrise, soft and cold like it was too tired to really fall. I was sitting at my little kitchen table, drinking the same plain black coffee I drank every morning, staring at the same newspaper I barely read anymore, when I noticed the envelope. It was lying halfway off the table like it had slid there on its own. Thick white paper, gold seal in the corner, my name typed in neat blue letters, Caroline Price. I stared at it for a long moment. Nobody sends me mail like that. Bills? Sure. Coupons? All the time. But a law firm? That felt out of place. I opened it, expecting a mistake, maybe something meant for the neighbor. But the first line hit me right in the chest. We regret to inform you of the passing of Ms. Delilah Price. My grandmother. The one nobody in my family talked about. The one I hadn't seen since I was 23, before my marriage fell apart, before life shrank into something cold and predictable. I'd tucked her name away somewhere deep, the kind of memory you only touch when you can't sleep. The letter went on to say I was her sole heir. A house in Ashford Ridge, tucked somewhere along the northern mountains. A property nobody had mentioned my entire adult life. I read the letter twice. Then a third time. None of it felt real. My grandmother had been the family enigma, the hermit, the poor woman who lost her way, as my father once said before shutting the topic down. I hadn't seen her in decades. And suddenly, everything she had was mine. It felt wrong. But it also felt like something heavy had shifted. Like a giant gear inside me finally clicked back into place. That night, I fed my old hound Baxter, stood at the window, and watched the city lights blur into the rain. My life had gotten so small without me noticing. The library where I worked. The grocery store on Tuesdays. Dinner alone every night. No surprises. No complications. Just repetition. So when I looked at that letter again, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A spark. A week later, I packed one suitcase, tossed Baxter in the back seat, and drove toward the mountains. The city faded fast. First came farmland. Then hilly stretches of empty road. The radio crackled into nothing. My phone signal vanished. The sky lowered like a lid. By the time I reached Ashford Ridge, the pavement had crumbled into gravel and the trees grew taller than church steeples. A wooden marker pointed down a narrow dirt trail, Price Hollow. I parked beneath a leaning pine and walked the rest of the way, Baxter trotting ahead like he already knew the route. The air smelled of wet earth and old stone. And then, through the fog, the house appeared. 2 stories. Weather-worn siding. A porch sagging like it had carried one burden too many. Windows black as old bruises. It looked abandoned, forgotten, held together more by stubbornness than structure. But something about it pulled me forward. I pushed open the front door. Cold air met me, heavy with dust and memory. Inside, the silence felt thick, like the house had been holding its breath for years. A wooden table still stood near the fireplace. A chair had been pulled back slightly, as if someone had stood up recently and simply never returned. On the mantel were a few photographs, faces I didn't recognize. A young woman holding a baby. A man by a river. My grandmother as a girl. It was eerie, but not frightening. More like stepping into a room that had been waiting for me. I explored a little, flashlight in hand. Everything was layered with dust but arranged with care. Nothing was truly broken. Nothing vandalized. Just, untouched. Preserved. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. I felt expected. That night I unrolled my sleeping bag on the bed upstairs, lit an old oil lamp, and listened to the house settle around me. Baxter curled up at my feet with a low, contented sigh. Somewhere in those drifting moments before sleep, I thought I heard a whisper. Not words. Just presence. Morning came gray and soft. I made coffee on a camping stove by the window and watched fog rise from the trees like steam off a hot bath. I walked the property with Baxter, studying the valley below. Abandoned mining huts. Moss-covered stones. The kind of place history forgot. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that my grandmother had chosen to live here. Not because she was hiding. But because she knew something the rest of us didn't. That night, while I was sitting by a small fire in the hearth, Baxter suddenly perked up. Ears forward. Tail stiff. Then he walked toward the far wall and scratched lightly at the floorboards. "What is it, boy?" He moved toward an old cedar wardrobe, the kind too heavy to move once it's in a room. He whimpered. Then scratched again. I opened the doors. Nothing unusual. Coats. Blankets. Boots. But the back panel caught my eye. One corner didn't match the rest. I pressed it. It shifted. My heart thudded. I pried the panel loose. Behind it was a small hidden cavity. Inside were tin boxes, wrapped in waxed paper. 5 of them. My hands trembled as I opened the first one. Bundles of cash. Crisp, old bills wrapped neatly in ribbon. Another box held coins. Another held documents. And the last box held a letter. My name was written on it. "My dear Caroline, if you are reading this, then you have come not for money, but for truth." She wrote that the funds weren't stolen, but rescued. Taken from corrupt men who meant to embezzle charity money raised after the flood that devastated Ashford Ridge 60 years ago. She had taken the blame rather than let them funnel the money into their own pockets. I chose silence over complicity. History may call me guilty, but I know what is right. Perhaps you will, too. I sat there, stunned. The woman I'd grown up believing was a recluse, had been a protector. A whistleblower without a voice. And now I knew why she'd been erased from family stories. The next day, a truck rolled slowly up the dirt path. An elderly man climbed out. Rugged face. Hands like stone. "Name's Hank Fowler," he said. "Worked these mountains my whole life. Helped your grandmother patch that old roof more times than I can count. Saw smoke from the chimney, figured I'd check who moved back in." When I told him who I was, his eyes softened. "Your grandmother was a good woman. Folks talked, sure. But talk's cheap in a town where nobody wants to admit who really holds the power." He lowered his voice. "You ought to be careful. Not everyone wants those memories stirred." That warning hung with me like fog. Later, I walked to the general store for supplies. Conversations went quiet when I entered. People stared. Whispered. And then a woman with gray hair and a gentle smile approached. "You must be Caroline," she said. "I'm June. Your grandmother sent me a Christmas card every year. Never once missed. I never believed the lies they told about her." That night, back at the house, I found my front door open. Just a crack. Inside, some drawers had been disturbed. A few papers misplaced. And near the hidden boxes, a folded note. "Stop digging. You don't know who you're up against. B." My stomach tightened. Somebody knew. And they were watching. The next morning, I headed straight to the Ashford Ridge Library. The librarian, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire, helped me dig through old archives. Newspaper clippings from the year of the flood painted my grandmother as a thief, but they also revealed something else. The chairman of the relief committee was a man named Benton Reeves. Wealthy. Influential. And in every photo, smiling like he knew he'd already won. As I read through the articles, a voice behind me said, "You're Delilah Price's granddaughter." I turned. An elderly woman with a reporter's notebook slid into the chair beside me. "I'm Laura Jacobs," she said. "Covered the flood for the Ridge Journal. I always believed your grandmother was innocent. But Reeves ran this town. Still does, in a way. She explained how every attempt to investigate him had mysteriously fallen apart. How witnesses were intimidated. How documents vanished. How Reeves' son now served as county attorney. They won't let the past stay dead, she warned. Not if it threatens them. That evening, headlights followed me up the mountain. Then turned off just before the last bend. My hands shook as I unlocked the door. I barely had time to light the lamp before someone knocked. Standing on my porch was an old man in an expensive coat, leaning on a cane, accompanied by a younger man with the stiff smile of someone who thinks intimidation is a conversation. "Evening, Miss Price," the older man said. "I'm Benton Reeves. This is my son, Carter. We heard Delilah's kin came back to the hollow." I forced a polite smile. "Can I help you?" Reeves took a slow look around the house. Remote place for a woman alone. Land like this can be dangerous. Carter stepped forward. "My father would like to buy the property. For sentimental reasons. I'm not selling." Reeves' smile tightened. "Everything has a price, Miss Price." "Not this," I said. As they turned to leave, Carter paused in the doorway and murmured, "Mountain roads are tricky at night. Be careful." The threat slid under my skin like ice. The next day, with Laura's help, I tracked down a nursing home resident named Samuel Cross, a former member of the relief committee. When I introduced myself, his eyes filled with guilt. "I should have spoken up," he whispered. Delilah confronted Reeves when she found the missing money. He offered her a cut. She refused. He threatened her. Told her no one would believe a woman over him. He handed me his old journal. Detailed meeting notes. Names. Dates. Amounts. Everything. I returned to the house and laid the evidence out across the table. And that's when I found a photograph stuck between two ledgers. A young woman holding a baby. My grandmother beside her. On the back, Delilah with Margaret and baby William, 1961. William. My father. A chill ran through me. Delilah wasn't my grandmother. She was my great-aunt. She had given her own son to her sister to protect him from the scandal. From Reeves. From all of it. I sat by the fire that night, holding the photo, crying in a way I hadn't cried in years. Baxter rested his head on my knee. The house felt different now. Not haunted. Just, full. Full of sacrifice. Full of truth that had waited decades to be seen. And I knew exactly what I had to do. On the 60th anniversary of the flood, the town held a memorial service. Reeves was scheduled to speak, as he had every year. A king addressing his subjects. I showed up early with Laura, Samuel Cross, and the editor of the local paper. Reeves stepped to the podium with Carter at his side. But when he saw me standing in the front row, he faltered. When he finished his speech, I stood. "Mr. Reeves," I said loudly. "I'd like to correct the record." Carter moved to block me, but the editor stepped between us. I walked to the front, holding my folder. "My name is Caroline Price," I said, voice shaking but strong. "And my great-aunt Delilah did not steal those funds. She saved them from the men who planned to steal them first." Gasps rippled through the room. I held up Samuel's journal. The ledgers. The bank statements. Reeves and his associates diverted relief money into fake companies they controlled. They bought flood victims' land for pennies. They ruined lives. And when Delilah tried to expose them, Reeves destroyed her reputation. Reeves sputtered, "This is nonsense. Lies." Samuel Cross raised his trembling hand. "It's the truth, Benton. You know it is." The crowd surged. Whispers turned to shouts. The journalist clicked her recorder on. Cameras rose. I looked Reeves in the eye. You took her silence as victory. But the truth outlives all of us. That moment cracked something open. Investigations followed. Carter resigned. Reeves suffered a stroke. The story spread far beyond Ashford Ridge. 6 months later, I stood on the porch of the newly restored house. Children ran through the yard. Laughter echoed through the valley. The Delilah Price Community Center was open, funded entirely by the money she'd hidden for decades. As I watched the sun lower behind the mountains, the wind brushed through the pines with a sound almost like a voice. You weren't alone, I whispered to the empty air. You just needed someone to finish the story. And sometimes, late at night, when the house creaks just right, I swear she's still here. Not haunting. Just, watching. Making sure the truth stays loud this time. So now I'll leave you with this. What do you think? Was Delilah right to hide the truth for decades, or should she have fought harder back then? Have you ever seen someone punished for telling the truth? Tell me in the comments. I'll be reading every single one.